Welcome to another episode of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. A progressive and populist insight into Michigan's political and cultural world. And of course, an entertaining show on how to make Michigan's political machine work for the people, and not just the elite few. Now, from the Left of Lansing headquarters from his mid-Michigan attic, it's time for the award-winning Pat Johnston. It's all yours, Pat.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to another installment of Michigan's premier progressive podcast. I am Pat Johnston, who still has a voice with the sinus infection, but we'll get through it. Now, I just have a question, though, for everybody. You really thought we wouldn't be the ones paying for dear leader Trump's ballroom? Really? I mean, here he was this past March saying that we wouldn't have to pay for the ballroom.
We did this no charge to the taxpayer whatsoever. This was all donations made by friends of mine and people that love our country. They love the White House, Preservation Society, the whole group, but not one penny of, and it's a very expensive building, very expensive ballroom, but beautiful, beautiful in keeping with the White House.
I have to admit, I really thought this time he was telling the truth. I did. I thought he'd do some good old-fashioned corporate bribing, having Amazon or Palantir or some other tech bro billionaires pay for the ballroom in order to receive some lavish kickbacks in the future, some good old-fashioned Trump collusion and corruption. But no. He let me down again. He let us all down again, as it's going to be us, you and me, the American working class taxpayers who will provide money for dear leader's precious little ballroom. The Republican majority in the Senate has introduced an amendment that apparently will provide $1 billion to build dear leader's ballroom for the rich and the corrupted. Well, wait. Trump said way back when that the total cost of this ballroom would be around $300 to $400 million. You remember that? And again, we, the taxpayers, wouldn't have to ante up one bit. Kind of like, his little precious wall. Well, this little amendment was conveniently tucked into a Republican ICE appropriations bill. Oh, and that bill for ICE is beyond infuriating in itself for those who believe in freedom, because the Senate bill includes over $30 billion for ICE. And the best part, it includes no new safeguards for American citizens and for undocumented citizens against the ICE Gestapo. It doesn't include any so-called reforms that I've been hearing so-called moderate Democrats say that they really push for. Reforms. Yeah, that never really happens, does it? And since Republicans in Congress are passing this bill as part of a so-called reconciliation package, they don't need to pass some 60-vote threshold. They don't need Democrats whatsoever. It just needs a simple majority. And yes, Democrats are the minority. This funding for ICE, without reforms, will last through 2029. Lovely, right? This is the same way the Republican Congress last year passed the wonderful so-called Big Beautiful Bill in which corporations in the Epstein class received enormous tax cuts and tax breaks and handouts, while the working class continues to suffer. So MAGA Republicans found a way to bypass all of the Democratic Party demands for ICE to be reformed while funneling more taxpayer cash to a lawless Gestapo that continues to terrorize people on American streets. And then on top of that, MAGA Republicans slip in this provision for $1 billion to build this stupid ballroom. The $1 billion, according to the bill's language, will support enhancements by the United States Secret Service relating to the East Wing modernization project, including above-ground and below-ground security features. Oh, how lovely. Man, the East Wing modernization project. Okay. Which, as we talked about last week, was how dear leader and MAGA Republicans were going to sell this idea that we, the working class, will have to pay for this ballroom to wine and dine the rich and the corrupt. Oh, we won't get to be in there, but the Epstein class will get to enjoy it. And they're selling it because they're saying how the thwarted assassination attempt at the Washington Correspondents' Dinner a couple weeks ago shows that we need a secure ballroom at the White House. They never even mentioned security ever until that incident. But saying we need security is how the Trump regime is trying to sell the idea that taxpayers must spend on this lavish ballroom so dear leader and his billionaire Epstein-class friends can party in style while supposedly having the best security, the best protection, while the rest of us have to live in this ocean of guns across the nation. It's unconscionable. It really is that this is happening at a time when the regime and its Project 2025 architects are slashing spending and investments on working-class Americans, like on Medicaid, on Obamacare subsidies, on food stamps, on the environment, and also on the IRS to ensure that Epstein-class tax cheats are getting caught. Oh, no, you see, we cut IRS funding so that way they won't go after Epstein-class tax cheats. It's really nice how that works out, right? And it's unconscionable how this is happening when Trump and Israel got us into an illegal and expensive war on Iran that's already cost American lives, but that's also resulted in Iran causing far greater damage to our Middle East bases than the regime is telling us. The Washington Post this week revealed how satellite imagery showed at least 228 structures at U.S. military sites in the Middle East have either been partially damaged or totally destroyed by Iran since the beginning of the joint U.S. Israeli war on Iran and Lebanon. That's according to the New Republic. So this isn't going as swimmingly as dear leader claims in his plethora of lies to us. And according to Iran War Cost Tracker, the estimated total cost of this war is around $70 billion so far. I know. The official government tally is around $25 billion, but we know it's far exceeding that number. In fact, researchers at Brown University's Climate Solutions Lab have estimated the amount of cash that working-class Americans are spending on gasoline to be around $11 billion since the start of this war. Gasoline prices in Michigan, according to MLive, are averaging around $4.87 a gallon, and that is up $1.65 since last year at this time. I thought he was going to lower costs. Bridge, Michigan reported last week that farm diesel prices have jumped from an average of $2.94 a gallon last summer to $4.57 currently, with most of the increases occurring in the 2 months since the U.S. attacked Iran and the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, through which a quarter of the world's oil supply normally travels. And Bridge, Michigan continues by saying that's a huge difference for farmers with equipment that can suck a half gallon of diesel or more per acre, a typical acre of corn getting between 3 and 5 passes over the course of a growing season. The math for John Delmott, who farms around 1,200 acres in Monroe County, an additional $6,000 to $10,000 in fuel costs. But remember, Trump was always about the farmers. This war is illegal, it didn't have to happen, and it's partially because, as many reports say, Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu gave a presentation at the White House arguing why we had to attack Iran. It was for regime change at the beginning, but then we said, oh no, we're going to stop them from building nuclear weapons. And then it was regime change. Then it was to stop them from nuclear weapons. It always changes. But we know for damn sure that dear leader has dismissed concerns that the working class has when it comes to affordability, believing it is nothing at all but a made-up term to hurt him and to hurt MAGA Republicans. He doesn't believe in affordability. Why would dear leader worry about affordability? He's never had to worry about that once in his life, which just proves what kind of bubble these Epstein-class guys truly live inside. Now, working-class Michiganders, working-class Americans are hurting, and our country's economy is in free fall as people are pulling back from driving and spending on other items like vacations, all because the Trump regime and Israel's right-wing government said that we needed to attack Iran and apparently Lebanon. This war was done because this is what the neoconservatives and the United States government and Israeli government have always wanted, and they finally got their guy in office to make sure it got started. And now we can't get out. You're hearing dear leader talk about the protesters who were killed in Iran last year. And while abhorrent, we've got our own government here in the United States gunning down American civilians right here who are protesting against the regime. But we're supposed to worry about Iran? What? We've got undocumented citizens dying inside ICE concentration camps across the country, including here in Baldwin, Michigan. Oh, and I keep hearing about the national debt, especially when Democrats hold the White House, and how we've got to cut down on spending for working class Americans while slashing taxes and providing corporate welfare for tech bro guys and Elon Musk. I mean, we hear that every time a Democrat is in office, yet you never hear them talk about the cost of the Iran war or the weapons of mass destruction that we give Israel to conduct a war in Lebanon and its genocide in Gaza. That's never talked about when it comes to the debt. You never hear anybody in the corporate press ask, well, how are we going to pay for this war? No, No. You see, that kind of spending is good because it goes to the coffers of powerful defense lobbyists who then get to go on cable news networks and talk about why we need to have war. And these people who worry about the debt at all times, you never hear them talk about $1 billion for a ballroom. A ballroom! Like we're, living in some roaring 20s and the Great Gatsby as the rich spends like there's no tomorrow and the working class continues to get pummeled. I mean, we sort of saw that with the whole Met Gala ball this week in New York. And I still can't believe some people are going to that thing. It just looks so wrong at this time. As working class Americans can't afford to get by or fill up their tanks thanks to wars and stupidly cutting back on clean energy, Dear Leader says it's time for us to pay not only for his illegal war on Iran, but to give Israel whatever it wants and whenever it wants it. As I've always said, when it comes to the Epstein class and when it comes to the Trump regime and when it comes to MAGA Republicans, it's always about priorities. We are never a priority. leftoflansing@gmail.com is the best way to reach me. Doing a solo show here this week. As I said, I was down and out for most of last week with a bad sinus infection. Second one of 2026, so that's not real uplifting news. Doctor said that those of us with bad allergies are having a rough go of it so far this year thanks to this spring weather. So I just needed a little rest, and I needed to give my voice a rest as well. It'll be a race to the finish to see if I can get through this one, but I think I'll persevere. I am getting somewhat better, and I have to admit, this one, though, did knock me around a bit. So that's why there was no Monday Musing and why I haven't really posted much on Left of Lansing's YouTube page or Patreon page of late. But that doesn't mean I wasn't following the news this week, and especially the latest news following the Michigan Democratic primary race for the U.S. Senate seat. And to quote our great progressive friend from Livingston County, Casey Helton, this week, it's a small club, and we ain't in it. Now, Casey posted that statement on Twitter in response to the story that former Michigan Democratic Senator Debbie Stabenow announced that she is supporting Democratic Congresswoman and Miss AIPAC Haley Stevens. In fact, just a day before, Stabenow endorsed Haley Stevens, the wife of the senator who Stevens and the corporate establishment Michigan Democratic Party hoped to fill his seat, announced her support for Haley Stevens. Oakland University Board of Trustee Colleen Ochoa-Peters said that she's backing the corporate PAC, and AIPAC bought Haley Stevens, who's also from Oakland County. Now, Senator Peters himself has not made any kind of an announcement, and I can't believe that he will, since Michigan's other Democratic Senator, Alyssa Slotkin, says she won't make an endorsement either. But Colleen Ochoa-Peters' endorsement, I think, sort of serves as a tacit thumbs up from Gary Peters, who was an all right senator, but he didn't really move the needle a whole lot, let's be honest, and he hated campaigning as he barely beat now Congressman John James, who's also running for governor this year. When he beat John James back in 2020, I really didn't see him lighting the campaign trail on fire. Let's remember, Joe Biden carried the state over dear leader Trump in 2020, but yet Gary Peters thought riding around on his motorcycle would help him connect with the working class. But with barely any notable achievements in the Senate, Gary Peters, probably led by some high-priced Democratic Party consultants, let's be honest, said, hey, put on a leather jacket and ride around the state, believing, that would be enough. I mean, Gary Peters should have destroyed John James as a sitting senator and in an election in which Joe Biden carried the state of Michigan against dear leader. Yet Gary Peters ended up winning by just over 1 percentage point. One. Let's not forget, he ran as a so-called moderate, which meant that he ran on barely moving the freaking needle in favor of the working class. Oh, like Alyssa Slotkin, who barely won her Senate race against Florida Mike Rogers by running the same kind of centrist, milquetoast, nebulous campaign, Gary Peters didn't seem fazed by the oncoming onslaught of the Trump MAGA authoritarianism about to take over the country, as he voted for several of dear leader's cabinet picks, including Kristi Noem to head Homeland Security, just like Alyssa Slotkin did. So now these Michigan Democratic Party establishment types are lining up and throwing their support towards Haley Stevens. And, it makes sense since Stevens has received the endorsements from many prominent Democrats, including former Representative Brenda Lawrence and former Michigan House Speaker Joe Tate, whose main job in Lansing wasn't really to serve the working class, but it was to keep corporate donors happy first and foremost. And as I've said on here before, Joe Tate's former chief of staff was appointed by Governor Whitmer to be on the Michigan Public Service Commission, that commission that decides on whether or not to okay rate hike proposals by DTE and Consumers Energy, and also greenlight hyperscale job-sucking and water-depleting data centers throughout the state. Well, Whitmer replaced a former environmental advocate on that commission with Joe Tate's former chief of staff because the chief of staff was viewed to be more industry-friendly for the energy and big tech lobby. It's all about being on the inside, being a team player within the establishment, and then getting rewarded with cushy positions to service corporate interests. So again, to me, it made perfect sense as to why these big-name establishment figures like Debbie Stabenow are quickly coming to the aid of Haley Stevens. One reason, of course, is that Haley Stevens is a darling of AIPAC's, and AIPAC views her as a very friendly voice and friendly vote to the right-wing Israeli government. AIPAC announced this week that it was holding a joint fundraiser for Haley Stevens and Maine's increasingly health-deprived and old Senator Susan Collins, who's struggling to survive her Senate race against a working-class populist and progressive Graham Plattner, who just made his opponent, Maine's Democratic Governor Janet Mills, bow out before the primary vote even happened, and Janet Mills was backed by the party establishment. Now, as Rogue DNC posted on Instagram, this AIPAC joint fundraiser announcement invites donors to contribute to pro-Israel candidates for the U.S. Senate, showing both candidates together with preset donation options. Oh, nice. The fundraiser shows how AIPAC is willing to support Democrats and Republicans who back Israel. And then there's this. In that same AIPAC joint fundraiser for Haley Stevens and Susan Collins, that Dr. Abdul El-Sayed and Graham Plattner represent a direct threat to the U.S. Israeli relationship, and a contribution now to defend Haley Stevens and Susan Collins will send a clear message that we will not let extremists rewrite the future of this relationship. Who's really the extremist here? I mean, I'm guessing with Israel's approval numbers down here in the country, the extremist position, the real extremist position to take as a Senate candidate this year would be to proudly accept AIPAC bribes. I mean, that's what I would think. I mean, make no mistake, AIPAC says a senator's main job is to serve Israel's extremist government and not working class Michiganders. Now I have to ask you, try to find any daylight between Haley Stevens and Mike Rogers on continued funding of billions and billions of dollars of American taxpayer money to Israel's extremist and genocidal right-wing government. I'll make it easy for all of you, okay? You won't find any. And please, don't forget how Haley Stevens accepted AIPAC bribe money in her campaign to defeat fellow Democratic Congressman in Michigan, Andy Levin, a couple of years ago. Andy Levin, of course, was part of the, Levin family here in Michigan that featured longtime Senator Carl Levin and Congressman Sander Levin, and the Levins are Jewish Americans. According to the Times of Israel, Haley Stevens drew significant support from a PAC founded to support women candidates and was seen as favored from the beginning because of the new district's maps. But with nearly half of the outside spending coming from AIPAC's PAC, United Democracy Project, the race also emerged as a battleground over U.S. Israel politics, made more poignant as AIPAC backed the non-Jewish candidate over the Jewish one. And so, again, what was Andy Levin's crime? Did he call Israel a genocidal regime? Well, let's not forget, this is 2022, a year before the Hamas October 7th terror attack, and before then, Israel's terrorist attacks against Gaza on a daily basis. So no, he didn't do that. Andy Levin simply called for a peaceful two-state solution, and AIPAC wasn't having any of that. You want to understand why the establishment Democratic Party figures like Debbie Stabenow are backing Haley Stevens? Just look at AIPAC spending. They're once again flipping off the Democratic base and independent voters who are strongly opposed to giving more money to Israel. But the Democratic Party elite, they don't care. They want the money. Now, the other reason why establishment Michigan Democrats are suddenly endorsing Haley Stevens at this furious pace is to signal to me that the establishment is fearing the working class candidate in this Michigan primary race, Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, and they fear that he will end up running away with this primary. They're noticing that Haley Stevens is a horrible candidate who can't reach voters. And when I mean voters, I mean Democrats and independent voters. They need Haley Stevens in Gary Peters' Senate seat because she won't propose groundbreaking populist policies like Medicare for all. She won't say that we must abolish ICE. She won't say that we need to end corporate donations, and she definitely won't go against her dear AIPAC donors. You see, establishment Democrats, they need her to do as little as possible, make some performative speeches here and there, but don't upset the corporate donor base. And you won't hear Haley Stevens call for an immediate end to Trump and Israel's war in Iran. And as I played for you the other week, Haley Stevens says that she will not call Israel's actions in Gaza genocidal. I mean, if you really want to get a good clue of who Haley Stevens really is, just check out the viral video that I posted on the Patreon page featuring Haley Stevens from a year ago, in which she just walks away from a Jewish American voter when that voter confronts Haley Stevens on accepting AIPAC money, especially when AIPAC supports Republicans, most of whom are against abortion rights, for example, right? How can you do that, Haley Stevens? How? And in that video, Haley Stevens just says thank you to the voter and walks away fast. I mean, if you don't have conviction for your beliefs in taking AIPAC bribe money, then what kind of convictions will you have to fight for the working class Michiganders, if you're willing to flood Israel with working class dollars rather than spending those working class dollars on the working class right here in America? So these endorsements are a sure sign to me that party insiders see this race becoming a major problem. And do you really believe that Debbie Stabenow wanted to make her endorsements now instead of a month later when absentee ballots start getting shipped off? You know better. And trust me, the establishment noticed the large crowd that met at Detroit's Mumford High School on a Sunday evening when Vermont Senator and progressive leader Bernie Sanders joined up with Dr. Abdul El-Sayed for a Fight the Oligarchy event. They were also joined by State Representative and Progressive State Representative Donovan McKinney, who's running against a crypto-corrupt Democratic congressman from the 13th District in Detroit, Shri Thandahar. Trust me, the establishment would rather have Shri in there and his corruption than they would a true populist, progressive, working-class representative like Donovan McKinney. He's fighting to strengthen the working class by going all in on Medicare for all, for instance. If you want to understand why Michigan Democrats and Republicans are talking about moving the primaries up to May, well, you're seeing why. They know the longer the working class electorate gets to hear from working class candidates, those who propose real working class policies, they know the worse it's going to get for anti-populist and pro-Epstein class candidates, pro-corporate candidates. Michigan voters are in a populist mood, and they aren't about business as usual anymore. You're listening to LOL.
A working class voice for the working class. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. If you'd like to tell Pat what you think of the show and maybe even congratulate him for providing podcasting excellence, oh brother, email him at leftoflansing@gmail.com. If you have an idea for a guest or a topic for a future show, email him at leftoflansing@gmail.com. We'd like to thank you for listening and for helping spread the progressive message in the Mitten State and beyond. Now, here's Pat Johnston.
Hey, before I forget, don't you forget to sign the Mop Up Michigan ballot petition. That ballot initiative would ban utilities like DTE and Consumers Energy from making contributions to our state representatives and senators in Lansing. And this initiative would also ban corporations that are doing state business from donating to politicians. Visit mopupmichigan.org and find out how you can sign the petition so we can get this issue on the ballot, and it will pass very, very easily. I guarantee it. Okay, I have a take on the state Senate special election in mid-Michigan, or what is sometimes called the Great Lakes Bay region. Democrat Chedrick Greene, who's a Saginaw fire captain, and he's also a former U.S. Marine, walloped the MAGA Republican Jason Tunney by winning 60% of the vote in Michigan's 35th Senate district, and that contains Saginaw Bay and Midland counties. I'm pretty familiar with that area as I was on WSGW for a number of years there. Now, it's a seat that was held by now Democratic Congresswoman Kristen McDonald-Rivet, who, if you recall, I talked quite extensively about in last week's Friday Short. Give it a listen if you haven't already. Now, this is a seat that sat vacant for some 16, 17 months after McDonald-Rivet exited after her winning her congressional seat last year. And on Left of Lansing's YouTube page last year, I spent around 70 seconds arguing why I thought Michigan Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer was making a costly error in delaying this race from finally happening. And here's what I said last August. Michigan Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer finally announced a date to hold a special election for a state Senate seat in Bay, Saginaw, and Midland counties. The seat was held by now Democratic Congresswoman Kristen McDonald-Rivet. If Republicans win the seat, it would deadlock the Senate, which is currently in Democratic Party control. And while that would suck, Whitmer still made a horrible political move. She's exhibited since Trump's re-election nothing but fear and weakness. Dear Leader Trump's approval rating right now is in the 30s, thanks to his MAGA murder budget, the tariff scheme, DOGE, attacks on free speech, attacks on clean energy jobs, the pardoning of January 6th insurrectionists, and also for the covering up of child sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein. MAGA Republicans know they're in trouble next year, and that's why they're resorting to gerrymandering seats across Texas. Instead of living inside their fears, Democratic leaders should offer a bold, progressive vision for working-class voters and for restoring our democracy. But Whitmer chose fear and cynicism. You either live by the principles that you care about living in a democracy or you don't. And by delaying the special election, Governor Whitmer probably hurt Democrats big time. Hey, as you can tell, I nailed that one right on the head, didn't I? Hey, look, I'm glad I was way off on my worries. And the Democratic candidate, Chedrick Greene, won the election in blowout fashion, giving the Democrats the majority in the state Senate here for the rest of the year, which is quite important since MAGA Republicans have the state House and the budget will dominate Lansing here for the near future. So at least Senate Democrats still have the majority there. But to quote the great Jason Robards from All the President's Men, I screwed up, but I wasn't wrong. Now, first, this special election race shows me that Democrats and independent voters are furious with the Trump regime and furious with MAGA Republicans and furious with corporate authoritarianism. They are furious. And while, yeah, it's a state Senate seat, many of the fights that we're watching about the state budget this year are a direct result of the MAGA Republican so-called big beautiful bill last year. Cuts to Medicaid, cuts to Obamacare, work requirements for Medicaid recipients, onerous work requirements. Because you know what? Attacking working class Americans is what MAGA Republicans and their corporate masters relish doing more than anything else. And the educational and environmental budget cuts. This will all impact the state budget. All politics are local. At the same time, all politics are affected by what happens on the federal level. But the election is still one way for voters to illustrate, in a democratic way, how they're fuming over the Trump regime's economy and the Trump regime's priorities, like, forcing us to pay for the regime's glitzy ballroom. A new Desert News Hinckley Institute of Politics poll released this week finds that nearly 4 in 5 Americans say the Iran war is driving up the cost of everything. Listen to these numbers, and trust me, these numbers are scaring the hell out of MAGA Republicans. 79% of national respondents say they are at least somewhat concerned about the Iran war's impact on the U.S. economy, with a full 50% saying they are very concerned. And a staggering 79% of Americans nationally report that the cost of daily goods has increased somewhat or a great deal since the war began. Meanwhile, only 7% of national respondents say they are paying lower prices. I'd love to know who those 7% are. So that is on a national level. But it's ringing true here in Michigan. Now, as Michigan Advance noted about this district, it says that McDonald-Rivet was the first Democrat to hold the seat in its history, though it covered a different portion of the state prior to the 2022 redistricting cycle. She won her election in 2022 with 53% of the vote. The district had much closer margins in the 2024 presidential race, as the AP noted that Kamala Harris barely edged out a win over President Trump. In the district, 49.7% to 48.9%. And she was able to pull through that slim victory on the strength of her 17 percentage point lead in the Saginaw portion of the district. So McDonald-Rivet won with 53% of the vote. Kamala Harris won by just 1 percentage point. But Chedrick Greene won with 60% of the vote this time around. So I'm thinking that working class Michiganders are beginning to let their feelings be known about the Trump regime. And I was wondering if MAGA Republicans had a chance in this race. But a good friend of mine who knows the area just as well, even better than I do, said that Greene was well known and well respected in the area. Name recognition was not a big concern since he's done so much in and around the community. So that much I really understand, since it seems to me that those who've spent their lives working in their communities, trying to improve their communities, those are the ones that tend to do well in local elections. Oh, and I am loving how the Michigan Republican Party is downplaying this humiliation by saying Democrats spent so much to keep the seat. Party chair, State Representative Jim Runestad declared last winter, just a few months ago, that this race would serve as a real bellwether for the state. But then he said after the loss how special elections aren't really bellwethers, only general elections are bellwethers. Okay, Jim. But back to my belief that Governor Whitmer was wrong to keep this 35th district seat open as long as she did. And I stand by that. Sure, the election was a ringing success for Democrats, but Dear Leader's numbers were dropping fast after he got back into office. And so Democrats were already facing a favorable electorate this time around after he got back into office. So I don't believe she should have waited, because above just winning party politics, thousands of Michiganders there didn't have a voice for them in the state Senate. I mean, Democrats can't claim to be the party of democracy and every vote counting if you just play politics to keep some kind of power play over MAGA. Look, we're playing a political war against MAGA, and I'm all for being strong against fascism. But Whitmer took quite a gamble. It worked out, but it left thousands still without a state senator. Now, finally, Chedrick Greene overperformed big time in this race, just as we have seen Democrats overperforming in other races across the country. And I bring that up because you're seeing some Democratic establishment supporters say that progressive candidates won't be able to win statewide races, especially here in Michigan, like, the Senate race. And I hear that. I'm like, are we being serious? In a year where Democrats are overperforming and an electorate has such a sour distaste for the Trump regime, for MAGA Republicans, and for the Democratic Party leadership, do you really think, let's say, Mike Rogers, who's sticking close to Trump, would have a chance against someone like Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, the progressive Democratic U.S. Senate candidate? You really think Mike Rogers would have a chance? Really? Because I don't. So those were my takeaways from the special election victory in that 35th Senate district. You're listening to LOL.
Bringing progressivism with passion each and every week. It's Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Follow us on Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, and the Gram. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcasts, and subscribe to us on YouTube. We'd also like to thank Audio Boom for publishing the show and helping us spread our populist, progressive, and patriotic message. Speaking of which, let's get back to the show with Pat.
Don't forget to subscribe and like the show on YouTube and wherever you are listening. And don't forget to subscribe to the show on Patreon. That is patreon.com/Left of Lansing. This week's Left of Lansing poll. Would you support an effort to expand the Supreme Court if Democrats regain control of Washington, D.C. in 2028? The answers will be yes or no. And you can vote on Left of Lansing's YouTube page, on Patreon, and also on Twitter. Time now for the Left of Lansing Last Call. Well, I was doing a little yard work last week while I was listening to Tim Skubik's Off the Record show on WKAR, and I noticed when I still had a voice that I was yelling to no one in frustration when Skubik and his panel of Lansing journalists interviewed veteran pollster Richard Zuba of the Glengarriff Group. And the first question posed to Richard Zuba was if foreign affairs will play any kind of role in this election, and here was Zuba's response.
This is going to be decided on the economy. Plain and simple. We asked this question, particularly in both of the primary surveys. What's the most important issue facing Michigan? There was not one respondent in that Democratic survey that said Gaza, Israel, or the Middle East. It is about prices and affordability. Clear and simple. This is not even close. And I think we need to step back here for a second. And this is probably something operatives across the state need to hear. Last year we did polling asking people, where do they get their information? What social platforms are they on? Only 18% of the state said they are even on Twitter, and only 4% said they use Twitter a lot. And I think there's a whole lot of people who think campaigns are won and lost on Twitter, and that's not the case. You win and lose primary elections by talking to older voters who dominate the August primary, and right now they care about costs.
Okay, well, on the Twitter front, I would agree to a point. Sure, Twitter is not representative of the electorate, but social media as a whole, hey, that plays a key role as less and less people have live TV options. Now, second, Zuba said that Gaza and Israel and Iran aren't on the forefront of voters' minds, and I guess if you ask it that way, then sure, it would make sense because affordability and a lousy economy is dominating everyone's day-to-day lives. But that's when I was really starting to yell out loud to nobody. Probably some of my neighbors thought that I was going mad. Because while he's talking about affordability and costs, Richard Zuba wasn't putting together how the Iran war and this country's continued insistence to keep flooding billions and billions of dollars over to Israel is all connected. And I was yelling at that point saying, how are gas prices not part of what's happening overseas? Thankfully, Bridge, Michigan's Jordan Hermani asked Richard Zuba the same kind of question that I was shouting to nobody. Listen.
So I want to return to something you said a second ago, which is that, this race is going to be decided on these economic issues, these gas price issues, which obviously people are hurting right now. But it's not as if the gas prices just jumped because they did. We're obviously in a foreign conflict right now. So, how is that I guess I'm a little confused how the foreign portion of things doesn't actually factor into this election, given that it's the whole reason why we have these higher gas prices in the first place right now.
Well, first of all, I think we need to separate out the Israel-Gaza conflict from the Iran conflict. The Israel-Gaza conflict is not at the top of voters' minds right now. It is at the top of a lot of Democratic activists' minds right now. But Iran is at the top of people's minds, but not because we're in conflict, because it's costing us so much. Because gas prices are soaring. It's driving everything else up.
Now, that was an excellent question posed to Richard Zuba there by Bridge, Michigan's Jordan Hermani, because I do believe that many voters are not separating Israel's genocidal war on Gaza and Trump and Israel's war in Iran and affordability and higher costs. Because why? Because it is all part of the same problem. The reason why you're seeing progressive populist candidates winning races across the country is, one, that those candidates aren't just talking about affordability, but they're also illustrating how corporate forces in the Epstein class are playing by a different set of rules and how the rules must be changed to level the playing field. They aren't saying we have to protect things, we have to take half measures. No, they are going full throttle in proposing real policies to help the working class. And the other reason progressive populist candidates are winning is also because they're illustrating how this nation's two-party system is allowing our money to be spent on Israel's genocide on Gaza and Trump and Israel's war on Iran. Americans are getting how this illegal and stupid war is hurting their own bank accounts while they see oil companies raking in large amounts of profits while we're also subsidizing said oil companies. Working class Americans are seeing how the Epstein class prioritizes spending on overseas conflicts and on Israel over prioritizing the working people in this country. Richard Zuba says the economy is going to be the number one issue. Yes, it is. But voters are putting two and two together that our overseas spending on idiotic neoconservative wars and misadventures and our reasons for giving Israel more of our money are all one of the same. And it's not a Democratic activist issue. As I read earlier from that Deseret News poll, 4 in 5 Americans say costs have gone up thanks to Trump and Israel's war in Iran. Foreign affairs and foreign policy are playing a role in the working class's anger because they're able to put everything together that thanks to that war, our costs are going up. And even before the war started, it wasn't like inflation was under control. Like I said in the last segment, while Democratic Party establishment leaders and office holders keep backing the regimes and backing Israel's misadventures in Iran, the Democratic Party base voter is seething in anger. How there's always money to build Israel more weapons, always more money to build weapons so that way we can blow up a girls' school in Iran. But there's never money for the kids and for the elderly and for the working class in this country. People are catching on. I don't think longtime party establishment people or even pollsters are really understanding how much the working class is in a populist mood right now throughout the country.
You're listening to Left of Lansing. Music for the show and everything else on Left of Lansing is provided by Wander Beats. To hear the latest project and complete music archives, check out Space Leopard on your favorite streaming site or subscribe to Space Leopard on YouTube. Now, back to our favorite progressive voice in Michigan. It's Pat Johnston.
Well, that's going to do it for this edition of The Left of Lansing, and my voice made it. Yay! Barely. Next week, I'm hoping to line up a great guest that I've been waiting to have here on the show for quite some time, so come back next week and drop me a line and let me know what you think of Left of Lansing, and if you have any stories or guest ideas, hey, I am all ears. That's leftoflansing@gmail.com. Before I go, I'm not sure if you saw this one, but according to an NPR Marist poll, 8 in 10 Democrats, 8 in 10 Republicans, and the same number of independent voters all support setting age limits for members of Congress. Yay. I mean, Democrats have already had, 3 people die in Congress this past year, and Republican Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell keeps malfunctioning on a monthly basis, and 92-year-old Iowa MAGA Republican Senator Chuck Grassley could have been the President of the United States of America had the worst possible scenario happened during that correspondence dinner. So I think, if we've got age requirements of when Americans can begin running for Congress and begin running for the presidency, then we've got to set some kind of age limits on how long these power-hungry people and their staff can remain in Washington. I don't think Congress was supposed to be like the activity room in a nursing home. And yes, I understand that would mean Bernie Sanders would have to go as well, and I'm fine with that. We need people on those seats who don't require 3 p.m. naps, although I love 3 p.m. naps. Guess I can't run for Congress. But what I can do is keep informing you in an entertaining way on a weekly basis on how we can keep taking the battle to them. Thank you, Michigan.
You've been listening to Left of Lansing with Pat Johnston. Left of Lansing was produced by Pat Johnston, brainstormed by Pat Johnston, researched by Pat Johnston, written by Pat Johnston, edited by Pat Johnston, and yes, hosted by Pat Johnston. Technical assistance by Dr. Heather. Thanks to our good friend Rich for website assistance, and thanks to our good friend Kirsten for the awesome podcast logo. We thank Audio Boom for publishing the podcast every week. Visit leftoflansing.com for more news and information. Thanks again for listening to Michigan's premier progressive podcast, and we'll talk with you again next week.